Hi, it's Mike Collett with the Davis County Amateur Radio Club, and welcome to Field Day. It's uh, it's going to be a little different this year, and thanks to Larry and Craig for setting up this recording session today. It's been a lot of fond memories thinking about Field Day, particularly Davis County, which is probably the one I attended the most. I miss Daryl Duffin's ribs. I miss John Maybe's pancakes. I don't miss the mosquitoes, and so we're going to have a mosquito-free presentation today. And we're going to talk about portable radio kits. I'm going to show quite a few different ideas for building some grab-and-go radio kits. And all of these have evolved over the years, probably over the last 30 years or so at least, to allow me to participate in different projects, taking radios to the field, which is something that I enjoy. That's one of the facets of the hobby I enjoy. We're going to talk about the Friendship Cruise, a river cruise that operated for decades down in Canyonlands National Park, and the portable systems that several of us built to help provide communications for that. Talk about systems for the Moab 240, long endurance run down in the Moab Canyonlands area. We'll talk about some portable HF operation, most recently near Yellowstone and also in Canyonlands National Park. Got to get both the mountains and the deserts in there. We'll talk about a little portable radio kit I use to support Lodija, the bike race from Logan to Jackson Hole. We'll talk about some of the new technologies in batteries and some battery packs that can be built using those. And we'll talk about a universal power supply that will operate off of AC, DC, solar, or an internal battery. The design goals of these kits are fourfold. They had to be very functional, they had to be compact, had to be lightweight, and they had to adapt to multiple power sources. So as I mentioned before, these goals, they're not achieved all at once. Typically, they're only achieved after a lot of trial and error and repeated experience in the field. So case study number one, here's the problem. Provide communications over nearly 200 miles of river course in a gorge 1,200 feet below the surrounding plateau. The answer was a linked portable repeater system that we drove in over four-wheel drive roads, sort of roads, that can operate without any commercial power for 3 days over the Memorial Day weekend. Now this gives you a satellite view of the Canyonlands National Park. The area in the center is called Island in the Sky. That's where the visitor center is for that district, and also Dead Horse Point State Park is also located in Island in the Sky. I set up, and several colleagues set up a station here at Canyonlands Overlook on the right-hand side on a plateau above the Colorado River. And Clint K7DOU and Gordon K7HFE and Ron K7RJ set up another fabulous system over here at Panorama Point up on the mesa up above the Green River. We used to do this whole river cruise from Green River down to the confluence of the Colorado and back up the Colorado to Moab on 80 meters on voice. And you can imagine what a chore it must have been to listen to that all day long for 3 days, all the noise of the atmospheric noise and the noise from the boat engines. It was really arduous. And later on we started experimenting and doing some site surveys, and we were able to find 2 sites up on the plateau that we were able to link together on UHF and set up 2 VHF repeaters that were linked, and that provided 2-meter communication over about 80% of the river course. And we'll show you some of the systems that evolved to do that. This on the map on the left kind of shows you where that cruise is with respect to Moab and Green River up here toward the top. The photo on the right is one from the operator position at Canyonlands Overlook, overlooking the Colorado River. And the one on the right shows a photograph looking toward the site on the top from Panorama Point. You see this mesa here in the sunshine, in the alpenglow, that's actually Island in the Sky, that center district of Canyonlands, which is right here. And then over here on this far plateau is actually the other side of the Colorado River. And the station up here on the top is set up right behind this bluff back up on the far plateau. It's 20 miles away. It's not exactly line of sight, but we get enough refraction over that rock to give us a good link with at least 2 or 3 watts of power. This is just a quick diagram that shows you what this repeater system looks like. It's actually a split site repeater, so we don't have to haul big duplexers around. On the top is the panorama point site. We have a receive site located on one mesa. The transmit site is located half a mile away. The two are linked together with UHF, and it's a 7212 repeater. So you got a 7.2 signal coming in on the left side. It's retransmitted. It's linked over a half a mile over UHF, and it retransmits on the transmit site on 1.2. So it's called a split site repeater. We do the same thing down at the bottom of the slide at Canyonlands Overlook on the Colorado River. A split site. These are only 300 feet apart, so we need some notch filters to keep the transmitter from desensing the receiver. So the way the linking works, everything operates on the same UHF simplex channel. If the 7.2 receiver hears a signal, both transmitters transmit. On the next slide, if the 9838 repeater receives a signal through the linking on the same simplex channel, then both transmitters transmit again. So anybody that transmits on either, and that's picked up on either receiver is retransmitted on both transmitters. And this allows people to have communications over that, 80% of that 200-mile river course. So everybody can hear everybody else. And while it looks a little complex, it's really a pretty simple system. There's the site of the Canyonlands Overlook with the Colorado River 1,200 feet below. This is just a little quick schematic of the receive site. The receive site's on the left. The transmit site's on the right, about 300 feet away. And so here's the 9838 repeater. Because these things are so close, 300 feet, we needed to put some notch filters in here to allow the receiver to hear the weak signals from the river without being overpowered by its own transmitter. And we were using an advanced receiver research preamp to make this thing extremely sensitive, and so the notch filters became doubly important. A little out of focus, but that's the receive site at Canyonlands Overlook, a little dual band antenna on top of a 24-foot mast. This is the base of the mast with yours truly fussing around with the little portable kit there, and that's what we're really going to talk about, is what's in the aluminum case. It's solar powered, and here's the notch filters right over here. This is what's inside of that aluminum box. We've got this is made out of kind of hand-me-down commercial components that work extremely well and don't cost an arm and a leg. The VHF receiver is inside this shield case here, and all the filtering is right here. And the little couple of watt UHF link transmitters in this little aluminum box right here. It's actually a PC board out of a Motorola handy talkie. So if we look and see what's inside, we pull off the shield cover. Here's the Micor receiver. It's actually upside down here to bolt into the case. And here's the transmitter, kind of kludged together. The HT transmitter in this aluminum case with a little fan, a cooling fan, because it runs continuously. There's the transmitter site. Dual band antenna, and what you can barely see is a little 40-meter dipole for our Sunday morning roundtable on HF. This is the transmitter at Canyonlands Overlook. It's simply a Kenwood 731 set up as a crossband, one-way crossband, so it receives the UHF signal from either receiver, either the one on this side of the river or the one on the other side of the Green River, and then retransmits on VHF. That's our little HF radio we'll talk about a little bit later. So this is the transmit side of that at split site repeater. This is the real fancy arrangement over at Panorama Point. This is the receive site, which is located right here at about a half mile from the transmitter. They have to hike this thing over. It's got 2 VHF beams built by Collett K7DOU with gas FET preamps that go into a voting receiver and then into a commercial receivers down here. And then it retransmits on UHF, both back to its transmitter and across the gorge to Canyonlands Overlook. Here's one of my all-time favorite pictures taken by Collett K7DOU of Ron K7RJ. This is the Panorama Point transmitter site. You can see the Green River clear over here, and Canyonlands Overlook is clear over here, 20 miles away. So this is the transmitter site. They're running a couple hundred watts, and you need a lot of batteries and a lot of generator to run this thing. It's got several thousand watts of ERP, and they've talked to mobiles 300 miles away, or no, 130 miles away. There's the UHF beam that they've got to get oriented to send the signal across to the other repeater. So case study number 2, provide communications over 240 miles of running trails in southeast Utah's mountains and deserts. This is a photograph of the aid station. It's called the Island, a cute little skeleton that one of the aid workers with a medical background brings to greet the runners as they come through. This is the river course from the Moab area around through Canyonlands, back up across 191 up into the LaSalle's and then back to Moab, 240 miles. And the little triangle here is the Island checkpoint. This gives you an idea of what the running course looks like in the desert portion. You can see the LaSalle's, they actually end up over here in the LaSalle's on the return leg. This is a evening view. That's why they call it the Island, that rock formation right there. This is right outside Canyonlands National Park. So you can see what kind of scenery we have to work in down there. Here's the station at Island. Brent Thomas operating with me this last year. That's the radio we use most of the time. It's Brent's Kenwood dual band radio that he's got mounted with a little platform here, batteries underneath, a little lid that closes over the radio and it makes it a nice compact case. The battery we'll talk about a little later is right here that we use. And this is the backup dual band unit that I brought. This was actually the backup unit. This actually started out in Canyonlands the previous year. I had this little ICOM dual band radio and it was getting wet in the rain. So I put it in a case with a watt meter and a speaker, a headphone jack, a speaker on off switch, and then cables and fuses in the top in the lid of the case. This is kind of a close-up. I just picked a case that was watertight. I could close the lid if it was raining. The antenna connector is remoted to the side of the case. A little Micron to SWR meter down here. Just handy to see if you've got any problems on your antenna. Kind of handy to have out in the field. So that's the little compact dual band kit. That's just one way to build it out of a little boat case. You can see the antenna connector and the mic jack and the Anderson connectors for the battery on the side. That's what the rest of the station looks like. A little short mast here, tripod mast with a dual band antenna here. We're mainly using on VHF and a UHF Yagi to try to reach over to the UHF repeater up on Island in the sky. Right here at the bottom is a 60-watt solar panel that we hang out there and try to catch the best rays of the sun to keep the batteries topped off. Case study number 3. The problem, provide HF communications for a car camping trip in a forest near Yellowstone National Park and again in Canyonlands National Park. The answer is a portable HF kit and portable power for operation on 40 and 75 meters. Now, this is a map of the location in Yellowstone. It's actually in an area of Jackson Hole, clear at the north end of Jackson, and we actually hike into Yellowstone National Park. This shows you the real horrible conditions we have to live in. Gorgeous forest, lots of tall pine trees, and here's Gordon K7HFE, who went up there with me for this hiking trip. And of course, you get geeks hiking, and they always have to have their HF radio toys along with them. So this is the HF radio kit, an old transceiver, probably 20, 25 years old, that works great. This is a close-up of the transceiver, the SWR bridge, and the case that everything fits in. And an 18 amp SLA battery, sealed lead acid battery used for power. Nothing fancy on this trip. And there we are on 7139 for the 40-meter Sunday morning roundtable. This is what's inside the case. The radio, the SWR bridge, the microphone, power cables, the J38 key. This is the original key I had as a novice in 1958. It still works better than any other hand key I've ever tried, other than maybe some paddles or a bug. And the really compact 40 through 10 meter dipole kit right over here, fits in the palm of your hand. This is just shows the transceiver. Very simple, not a lot of knobs, not a lot of functions, but it does just great for portable use. And a picture of Gordon with the antenna that we used a plumb bob and some nylon line to get it up about 30 feet into the pine trees. Now, the following fall, we operated down in the Needles district of Canyonlands National Park. This is a picture toward the Needles. You can see where they call it the Needles district in Canyonlands. This is the campground, used to be called Squaw Flat. Now it's called the Needles Campground. Beautiful junipers and some pinyon pine. And you can see the table over here with the food and the camp stove, the water, and the radio. This is the antenna that we managed to get up into the trees. You can see the center insulator right here on the cursor, the nylon line going up into the tree that we used to pull the antenna up, and then the two ends of the dipole that are strung out in kind of an inverted V fashion, and the coax coming down. Here's Collett K7DOU at the mic on our 40-meter roundtable. Here's that old trusty HF rig again in front of the Coleman stove and next to the water. And here it is, the little close-up. You can see that we got a pretty flat match with that antenna. And of course, we pruned that to length on several previous trips. And there we are on our 7139 frequency. This is an antenna tuner that I built, gosh, probably 30 years ago, that fits in a little aluminum case that's about half a cubic foot. So it's a fairly compact antenna tuner with the two capacitors and the rotary inductor, all this surplus stuff. Here's what's inside the tuner. It's an SJC type of tuner. Really nice circuit to give you just a wide matching range. And you can see, we took some pains to get everything to fit into this little cabinet and get the knobs in the right place and the capacitors in the right place. And the little reflectometer sensing line right here that's pulled out of one of those surplus cheapy import SWR bridges. But this particular arrangement gives you a really good match. And it's got a ballot in the back, so you can feed coax single wire or balanced ladder line for an all band dipole. Here's that one's a little out of sync, so we're going to come back to that in just a minute. Case study number 4. The problem is to provide dual band communications plus APRS for the Lodija race director, something that could be mounted in his truck in less than 20 minutes. I'm going to pause and see if there's any comments or questions, or say, hey, Mike, this is bad news. You need to stop now.
So the only question I have so far is for the Friendship cruise, the antennas were monsters. And
Yeah, actually, the antennas were pretty simple. They were 24 to 30-foot masts with a simple fiberglass, a little diamond X50 or I think it was an X50 or X100. It's about a 6 dBd gain antenna on top. So it's really just a 24-foot aluminum mast with 3 guy wires and a dual band fiberglass antenna stuck on the top. Now, what you're probably referring to is all of the Aggies over at Panorama Point.
no, well, actually, the for the Moab run, the antennas were a good bit shorter and not on a 24-foot mast. Is that because you were in a different location, or is that?
Yeah, that's right. Good point. Yeah, different location. That was actually a tram fiberglass dual band antenna on the top of that 15-foot, just one of those tripod masts, telescopic masts. It's about 7-foot long fiberglass antenna, and we were line of sight to the radio site, which was only about 5 miles away. So it wasn't, it didn't take an act of Congress to reach that particular site.
Okay.
The other one on the Friendship cruise, we were talking to boats 1,200 feet down in the river gorge. And so that's why we took the pains with the preamps, the gain antennas over on the Panorama Point side, because we were talking to boats, 1,200 feet down in the gorge out of line of sight, depending on signals reflecting off the sides of the canyon. So we just had a bigger chore on our plate to hear weaker stations with that arrangement and also reach back to them.
Thank you.
Thank you. For this Lodija, the answer to this particular chore is a very compact dual band radio kit for the vehicle and backup portable power, plus a very compact APRS kit. Some photos of the start and the finish lines and in between, and beautiful, gorgeous picture up there crossing the Snake River on that bridge by Wilson up in Jackson Hole, the Tetons in the background. You can tell we really like to go to really, really, really bad locations for all these radio projects. Just love the scenery. This is a little dual band kit. It's in a little case that measures a little less than a foot square and about 3 inches, maybe 4 inches thick. It's got an ICOM 207H radio in it, a little dual band radio. And we got a map of the course and the Andersons to connect batteries, and the cigarette lighter from the car to keep the batteries charged up. A little speaker, and then the APRS transmitter just sits right in here, which is rather compact, just to beacon our position on the course. There's the map of the course, and there's right behind it is a little map with all the different frequencies we use on all the repeaters up through the course. A little DC voltmeter to check the battery voltage. And we float this thing on a little gel cell, so when the car is off, the radio is still running when we're stopped checking on checkpoints. And just a little view of the radio on one of the channels that we were using on the system. Here are some other examples of some compact portable radio kits that were built over the years. Some of these I had at the swap meet last, February. They all have new owners now. The one on the left is another ICOM 207, and it's in a case that is about a foot square and about 6 inches deep. It's got, again, the same model radio, the 207. It's got a 15 amp AC power supply right here that's very compact. It's got a 10 amp hour SLA gel cell right here and a battery voltmeter right here in the lower right. So it'll run off AC power. It'll run off, a cigarette lighter socket in a vehicle, and it'll run off its own internal battery power while you try to find the external power source. So it's three-way power in a fairly compact case. The one on the right is a similar arrangement using an old, probably a 30-year-old ICOM 2000, which is really a nice radio because it's got this massive heat sink on them that you don't find anymore. You just find little dinky heat sinks and blowers. I love this one because it has a massive heat sink to use in portable operation without depending on a blower, which draws, additional current from your battery if you're operating portable. I love these old radios with those big, massive heat sinks. So I tend to use those in these portable kits wherever I can scrounge them up. Again, a battery, voltmeter, and a switch to disconnect the battery from the system. This is a similar arrangement using a Kenwood, a little newer one. Smaller heatsink depending on a blower, but a great radio, a TM-V71A. It's a dual band kit. Again, the AC power supply, the DC cable, and the onboard battery, and all the fusing for all the DC circuits. So a nice compact arrangement in a rather compact case, and then remoted the antenna out here so if it's raining, you can close the lid and keep the radio dry. Here's the orange box that I built probably 25 years ago. And here it is being shown off at one of the December meetings, the swap meet and the elections meeting. This, you can see the old Friendship Cruise uplink receiver and link kit over here. But this is kind of the orange box that is used for ham radio activities. Got the antenna connections on the side, a cigarette lighter DC connection, a couple of spring-loaded clips for DC cables that are it's a speaker connection off an audio speaker. And here's what's inside of it. The TM-731 dual band radio here, that's about a 40-year-old radio, I think. I think I bought this in, maybe it's 30, I bought this in about 89. The 50-watt 2-meter radio, that IC2000 with a massive heat sink, and the Alinco DR135 that has a built-in TNC. So what you don't see is the little DB9 cable that can plug into the computer. So it has dual band VHF packet and an expanded scale voltmeter. I found some of these a while ago and I really love them because they just give you a nice representation of battery voltage and spreads out 5 volts over the entire meter scale. So you can get a really good idea of what kind of shape your battery's in. This unit has a 4-inch cooling fan behind the packet radio to cool the heat sink on the dual band rig in case this is used as a crossband repeater. So it's got a cooling fan in it and a fan high-low switch to conserve current when it's not too hot, and on hotter days, get it up in the high fan position. This is the outside of the case. That's actually a speaker grill, a cooling fan grill. And over here is a internal speaker for one of the radios. And you can see the external connections on the side, the dual band connection, the VHF one, and the packet radio, and some DC outlets for HT chargers or accessories. And the lid, it's a removable lid. This boat box makes a handy storage compartment for an SWR bridge and the patch cable, one of those multiple screwdrivers with 2 different sizes of flat blade and 2 different sizes of Phillips, LED flashlight, a collapsible antenna, and some coax adapters that are UHF to VNC. It's a barrel, a UHF to VNC, and a VNC to UHF, a couple of sets of those adapters. So the lid makes kind of a handy storage for the accessories for the kit. So we'll go next to power and battery power, portable kits. You saw the naked battery that we hauled up to Yellowstone, and those things are heavier and they don't have handy handles on them. So it's kind of nice to find a case that the battery just fits in. So now you've got a nice carrying handle, something to keep the fuses and the external connectors situated. Here's a voltmeter and a USB jack on the left-hand side and some Anderson connectors on the right-hand side, and about 20 amp hours of battery power in this SLA battery kit. Now this thing weighs 16 pounds. So Larry Jacobs years ago introduced me to the lithium iron phosphate batteries, and so we'll talk a little bit about those. That weighs 10 pounds, and that's a 20 amp hour battery. Now they make a 30 amp hour that's the same size that fits in this little Seahorse SE300 case. The little neoprene gaskets around the edge to keep the battery just nice and snug in there. Room for the fuse holders, and then room for the little combination device here that gives you battery voltage, on-off switch for the voltmeter, and a USB 5-volt output for charging cell phones or computers or whatever. And then the Anderson connectors on the right, and then they come with little gaskets to keep them sealed against weather and rain. So a little higher technology battery. Not quite half the weight, but almost. The battery itself is about half the weight. And lithium iron phosphate battery. We'll talk about more about that in just a minute. So lead versus lithium. You know, what are the pros and cons here of the lighter weight batteries? Well, you can see up on the top graph that the sealed lead acid battery you're going to be charging it with 13.8 volts, which where it likes to float. But in absence of that external power, it's probably going to be a little over 12 volts, 12 and a half. And within 50% of its discharge cycle, it's going to reach that 12 volt output voltage and now be at 11 and a fraction and decreasing down to 10. And most radials will start dropping offline somewhere between 11 and 10 volts. So you're going to get about 75% usable capacity out of that battery. In contrast, the lithium iron phosphate battery, you can see the discharge curve here. It's going to give you an open circuit voltage at a little over 13 volts until about 90% of its discharge cycle. It will remain above 12 volts. And then I'll fell off pretty fast above that. But you get much longer usable capacity out of the same capacity battery with this chemistry than you do the lead chemistry. So what are the pros and cons then, other than just capacity? And here's a handy chart I found. The lead acid on the left and the lithium iron phosphate on the right. You get about 2.5 times the average life cycle, about 2,500 cycles out of the lithium and about 1,000 cycles out of the lead acid. In terms of watts to weights, you can see that the lithium weighs a fraction of what the lead acid weighs in terms of the watts to weights ratio. The lead acid is about 2.5 times as heavy. The lithium costs almost 5 times as much, so it's a lot more expensive in terms of initial outlay. And then over the life of the battery, since you get 2.5 times the battery life out of it, turns out to be about a 15% greater cost over that same lifetime, where you would use 2.5 lead acid batteries here. You would use 1 lithium battery over here. So, but it's not trivial. The cost is not trivial. Here's some 18 amp hour gel cells with some eBay prices and Amazon prices. So around $34 to $40 for the sealed lead acid, which weighs 12 pounds just for the battery, and between 160 and 240 for the 20 amp capacity lithium iron phosphate battery. Same exact size, half the weight, and then that longer discharge cycle to keep it above 12 volts. Now, it's important to point out that we're talking about lithium iron phosphate here, not lithium ion. The batteries you get, for the little jump starters for the car, the little compact ones, the radios, the batteries on your handhelds, the external batteries to charge cell phones, those are lithium ion. You can get this same size in lithium ion, but lithium ion has a nasty habit of catching fire if the terminals are shorted or if you overcharge it. You don't have that problem with lithium iron phosphate. And so it's really important to make sure which lithium chemistry you're getting when you get a battery. And so I've really gravitated toward this lithium iron battery because it's so much safer to use than that lithium ion. So that's the gamut here, with just some ideas on some of the things that I put together over the years that have generally been, the need has generally been presented as an event to support a race or mountain activity or some hiking or backpacking out in the Tules with some portable radio kits. And so then you start scrounging up, nice affordable radios on eBay or at swap meets, finding the right size container to put them in, organizing the charging cables and the fuses and the Anderson connectors and the accessories, and just having fun over the years, trying to put those things in a nice handy case. So if you want to go do a trip somewhere and you need communications, you don't need to spend a lot of time rounding up all of the hardware. You've just got a little box, and that's why they call it grab and go. So Craig, Larry, thanks for your hosting today, and we'll see if there's any final questions today.
So Mike, I did have one question for you.
Sure.
In these projects that you've created, it appears that they were built for a very specific purpose. Can you walk us through what your thought process is when you're designing a kit?
Well, mostly trial and error. When we were doing the Friendship Cruise, we used to do that on 80 meters. And one year, this is clear back in 1974, first time I'd done the Friendship Cruise, I was actually operating on one of the rescue boats. And there was 2, 3, 4 rescue boats with ham radio operators on them patrolling the course. Because if a boat broke down in that gorge to the middle of nowhere, there was no way they could self-rescue. They needed somebody to come and either fix their boat or tow them to the nearest dirt ramp to have their boat pulled out. And we needed to coordinate all that on radio. So one evening we were down at Mineral Bottom, which is about 30 miles down the Green River from Green River City, which was the start of the cruise. We were camped there overnight, and just around dusk, there was a boat racing up and down the water, just horsing around, and all of a sudden we heard silence. And about 20 minutes later, the boat finally came into shore there at Mineral Bottom. And they had a 13-year-old girl who had a broken arm that was going into shock. And what had happened, the boat had hit a submerged sandbar, had come to an instant halt and thrown her against the windscreen of the boat and broke her arm. So she was going into shock, and we were down there in the middle of nowhere at Mineral Bottom. So I went down to the boat where the radio was, which was a little Hallicrafter's tri-band tube affair with a transistor power supply, fired up the radio on 80 meters and tuned across the band, and found a net operating in Colorado. So I broke into the net, told them we needed some medical help. They called the Colorado State Patrol. The Colorado State Patrol called the Utah Highway Patrol. The Utah Highway Patrol called the National Park Service, and about 2 hours later, a gal in a little Park Service station wagon ambulance came down the dirt road to the dirt boat ramp at Mineral Bottom to get the gal and get her into the hospital in Moab. And I noticed that she had this Motorola radio hanging under the dash of her ambulance, talking to the Park Service dispatcher on VHF. And that was actually the catalyst for the Friendship Cruise linked repeater system. I thought, well, wow, if they can talk to civilization on 2 meters, we ought to be able to try this too. We tried bouncing signals off the canyon walls with big beams and tried all kinds of crazy apparatus. And then finally started designing 2-meter radio kits that we could haul around into the bush and set up remotely, and set up our own repeater system out there in Canyonlands to mimic the coverage of the Park Service repeater, which was about 10 miles away from us. So that was the catalyst to get that Friendship Cruise system designed. The first time we tried it, we tried a crossband repeater. And it was just really confusing because nobody could hear both sides of the conversation. And so from that, we then tried an in-band repeater without the notch filters, with a split site about 300 feet apart, the transmitter and the receiver. And the transmitter kept blanking out and desensing the receiver. So then we had to add cavities. And then we had to add a preamp. And so all of these things kind of were designed over a course of years as we tried different things that didn't work, to then try things that did work. And then once we found the system that did work, the next project was to try to get it into a smaller and smaller and smaller case that we could just scrounge up and just kind of marry all the components in the smallest possible case. So that's just one example of how that system came to be. Larry, did that answer your question?
It absolutely did. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a question as well. There are some of us that look at all your soldering and putting things together, and our stomachs kind of tighten up. If you had the if you weren't concerned too much about, or as much about, the cost of the radio, do you have a radio or a couple of radios that make you go, gee, I wish I'd had that, and if I were doing this again, I would just use this radio and solve all these problems?
The radio is just one piece of the pie. The location, the antenna arrangement, the filtering or the preamplification, the system design is so much more important than the radio that the radio is almost an afterthought. Clint's system, for instance, with his homemade gas FET preamps, his 25-year-old commercial radios, which, outperform most ham radios, utilizing, any kind of radio is going to be optimized when you really work on all the systems surrounding the radio. So we've never wished we had a fancier radio. Even these old things that are kind of beat up and get full of red dirt and water, and they actually work pretty well. And so there's never been, I've never been one really to chase the fancier radios because they get smaller and smaller and have smaller heat sinks, which then depend on a fan or a blower. And so now you've got something that can easily fail. If that fan sticks out there in the wild with sand and rain and everything blowing around, you've got a radio that now you've got to operate on low power, and you've lost a lot of utility. So you're probably asking the wrong guy. When I was in the Navy and flying around the Pacific, I had an HF radio and a homemade amplifier I would haul around in the Aleutians and Guam and over to Southeast Asia. And it was a KWM2, which is the fanciest radio I ever had at the time. It was serial number 40, KWM2. It was probably 20 years old when I got it in the 70s. It was one of the first KWM2s that were ever made. It was probably one of the nicest transceivers I ever operated, but again, it was kind of an old hand-me-down. So if you want to talk to somebody about really high-tech radios, you probably want to talk to a DXer who really wants to use all of the digital signal processing and the fancy filtering in the more modern HF radios. I tend to use kind of beaters, if you will, that I can drag out in the field that are kind of tried and true and have really basic functions because there's less to go wrong. And you don't have to go through a menu to figure out how to change the squelch or to change the channels. So that may not be a really good answer to your question, just because of, you know, my orientation is to use, you know, really simple components to build more complex systems, just because they tend to be more reliable and easy to use, and particularly easy to fix.
Yeah, that answers the question. I was thinking you were just saving money, but I see what you're saying. I mean, I noticed the, you know, the larger heat sink of a couple of the radios, but I thought the rest you were just using old radios you had around. But
Well, or yeah, that's true. And would have one for one purpose and say, hey, you know, I need a portable kit to do this particular job. Oh, hey, I have a radio that I can use to do that without buying another radio. I go through a lot of radios, you know, trying to find ones that work and don't work. I usually buy them used. That Kenwood TMV71 and the ICOM IC23 2370, whatever it is. I got one here, 2730. Those are current production dual band radios, which I really like for their functionality. I have a lot of memories. They both come with voice prompts. So as you're changing channels in a vehicle, you can, you know, your 146.720 makes them handy to use. Those are probably the fanciest VHF or dual band radios I've got, which are current production radios. So I do use them, but I still like the old ones with the big heat sinks.
yeah,
So
great.
it's kind of fun to, you know, wander around the VHF Society swap meet to look for some of those.
Thank you very much.
Plus, if they break out there in the middle of nowhere, you don't have quite as much trauma that if you have a $500 radio breaking on you.
Sounds good.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to present. I hope somebody gets at least one idea of something to go try and build out of the presentation. I've had a lot of fun building these because I really like taking technology out there in the mountains and the deserts and trying to do something useful with it. So thanks, Craig. Thanks, Larry, for teeing this up today.
Thank you for your time. We very much appreciate it.
And have a very fun field day remotely.
Absolutely. Thank you.